Red clay caked the shoes of the two travelers. The ends of their dusty jeans were still damp from the last crick in the last holler. They stopped on the railroad tracks and sat, just for a minute. Between them, they had 2 candy bars, a handful of sugar packets, 1 bottle of water, and 1 can of beer. Share and share alike. The sugar went into the water to give it some flavor. When they heard the low, hoarse rumble of the engine coming around the bend, Graydon Jones and Terry Smith scooched off the tracks. "You think we should take this one?" Terry asked. Graydon took a small notebook from his back pocket and flipped through it. "Nah, I think it's heading east." "Short nap?" Shit. They did not want to go back to Short Nap, Georgia. Not now, not ever. They left the tracks behind and cut through the thicket until they found a road. It was red dirt, but a road all the same. By now, both of the boys were legally old enough to drive, although neither of them ever had. Nor had they possessed a legal, laminated identification of any kind. So they did a lot of walking. They saw a green sign outlined in white, covered in kudzu. It read, "Keepo Flats. Step lively. There are snakes." "Interesting," Graydon said. In black spray paint, someone had written "Keep Runnin'" over the name of the town. They didn't run, though. They were far too tired for that shit. A quarter mile further, they found the edge of the little non-existent town of Keepo Flats. On one side of the road, there was a nice new gas station. Big bright neon sign, building of glass covered in Camel Cash offers, Budweiser ads, and college football schedules. Chili dogs 99 cents. Free refills on coffee. On the other side of the road was the old gas station. Signs stripped down to a bare pole, gas pumps torn away, leaving little empty cement islands on faded blacktop. A little building, shuttered, and an old white man with an old white beard sitting on an orange crate, petting a 3-legged dog. The two boys looked at each other. "Well, obviously," said Terry, and they both went to the old gas station. They approached the man slowly, loudly, so that he could see them coming. "Y'all open?" Graydon asked him. The man laughed and slapped his knee. "We could use a beer," Terry said. "You happen to have one?" The man pointed at the For Real gas station across the street. Gray and Terry pooled their money. They had just over $6, and they gave it to the old man. "You get what you can, and we will split it 3 ways. What do you say?" They waited with his dog, which was also blind, in addition to lacking a hind paw, as the old man went to buy them beer. And then they sat with him and they drank it, and eventually they made introductions. "I'm Graydon Jones, and this is my partner, Terry Smith." The old man burped and rubbed his head. "Graydon Jones? You don't say. I met a man named that once, right hereabouts, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. You kin to him?" "I can't say, sir. If he was handsome and smart, then I would venture a guess that I am. If he was ugly or rude, then probably not. The old man laughed. You're kin to him, all right. You glad-hand white folks the same way he did. Imagine y'all two boys looking for the old snake church. Graydon and Terry looked at each other and shrugged. Imagine so. The broadcast started. Old Elmo was back at it again. Excuse me, Terry stepped up, humble and polite. I'm not so well versed in your local history. Who is Elmo? Hell, boy, don't you know anything? The preacher, Elmo Cubbins. The one responsible for setting them snakes loose on the congregation back in '69. Every so often he comes back over the air on the radio. Somewhere out deep in a swamp, no one knows. Still does his old-timey fire and brimstone routine. Surprised you boys don't know. He was talking about you just the other night. Well then, I guess we are in the right place. The boys cracked open their second beer and cheers to that. The following story takes place in 2003, following the events of Guts and Blood. This is Tongues. Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem, killers, cannibals, and cults, fearful fiction and furious fact, tall tales, and terrible truths. This is a scary home companion. It was 1969, some 34 years before the events of this story, give or take a few months, when the horrible thing happened at the Baptist church just outside of Keepo Flats. A fish fry and satanic exorcism, an attempt to raise funds and demonstrate the awesome power of the Reverend Elmo Cubbins, who was set to exorcise a snake demon from the soul of an afflicted young man. The details of what happened that day have already been covered here in an episode called They Shall Take Up Serpents. But suffice to say, several dozen local men, women, and children were bitten to death by a multitude of unholy snakes that exploded through the body of the possessed man. Many innocent people left dead, many more impacted. The entire area was cut to the quick and near to abandon after that day. Keepo Flats went from a growing town to a ghost town, a handful of houses, and a snake-to-human ratio that never went down to anything approaching natural. As the sun started to set, the talkative old white man offered Terry and Graydon a place to stay. No beds, no pillows, but 4 walls, a floor, and the better part of a ceiling. You boys don't want to be out there at night. Snakes get thick and aggressive, like they think this place belongs to them. It don't. Laying on the ripped-up tile floor of an abandoned gas station, which somehow still smelled faintly of chocolate syrup and vapor rub, the boys stared up through the shreds of the ceiling into the glinting night sky. It was bright that night. The reflection of the hidden moon casting the stars with a golden backdrop. In the back room, they could hear the hissing of a radio as the old man searched the AM frequencies for another phantom broadcast. A few minutes of quiet, And then the old man whispered to them from their doorway, "Y'all boys got any more beer money? That place is open 24 hours, you know." They slept fitfully. Dreams and nightmares slithered in and out of their heads, leaving tracks on the ripped-up tile. They were both awake at dawn, putting their socks back on and wishing they were a little more dry. This far south is heavy with humidity. Nothing ever gets 100% dry. The old man was already on his crate out front. The dog was next to him, chewing on the headless remains of a snake. "Boy got him some breakfast," he said to the lads. "You think he minds sharing?" Graydon asked. "I could use breakfast." Wouldn't recommend it. Wouldn't recommend snake meat. Not even from Miss Thelma," the old man cautioned. "Around this time, usually that gas station throws out yesterday's donuts. I'm fixing to go for a dive. Y'all care to join?" Graydon slung the half-empty backpack over his shoulder. "No, sir, but thanks for the offer. You mentioned that church. Could you point that out to us?" "Just follow the road on, past the houses, whatever houses left. You'll see the sign for the fish fry eventually." "The sign is still there?" Terry asked. "Course it is. What tomfool gonna go out there to take it?" As they walked away, Terry muttered, "Truth laid bare, I am not above diving for yesterday's donuts, Gray." Graydon didn't want to admit it, but the thought made his stomach rumble a little bit too. They kept walking for a piece, started seeing a handful of abandoned houses. Long overgrown, weathered. "So we're just going to go out there and see what happens?" Terry asked. It was a fair question, and Graydon knew it. But he didn't know what else to say. This feels like the way to go, man. This is the only thing I know, to let the road lead me, the signs. If you have another idea, I'm open to it, Terry. Terry didn't have another idea. Although he thought the idea of following omens and portents was a load of hogwash, when Graydon explained it, there seemed to be some subsonic sense to it all, and underlying poetry that spoke to his spirit. And being a sensitive young man who had been through a lot of things so far, Terry was open to following his gut instinct. The Harrowspecks had kidnapped them separately for his own arcane designs and cut them both open. The Harrowspecks had tied two strangers together by their entrails. He bound them and made them something that they weren't before. The knots had been untied. They survived, but the two had never left each other since that night. On some level, they were still tied together. Neither one of them tried to fight that. Hell, why would they? They walked by more houses, little more than tar paper shacks and A-frame sheds, until they finally saw a sign of life. 3 little girls jumping rope in the scruffy, half-dead grass in front of a neat little home, a house that someone tended and kept. When the girls saw them coming, they stopped dead. 2 of them bolted inside the house, hollering for their mother. The third, a very plump little girl, walked to the side of the road. She was dragging the clothesline that they had been using as a jump rope. She asked them, "You them boys from the radio?" "Imagine so," Graydon said. "What did that man say about us?" "Nothing worth nothing. Said you were Cubbins, all. He's crazy, that's what Annie says. Sees the future, but if you can see the future, then why you living in the swamp eating snake meat?" Terry asked, "Did you hear him on the radio?" "No, Annie told me about it. I do hear him in my head sometimes when I'm sleeping. Happens to everyone around here. Sometimes you forget if it was the radio or if it was a dream." Graydon jotted that down in his notebook. "Why you writing?" the girl asked. "Because I don't want to forget you," Graydon said to her. "You are awesome, kid. What's your name?" "Piffany." "Who are you?" "Piffany!" an old woman shouted from the doorway. She was brandishing a rolling pin, an honest-to-goodness rolling pin, like a battle mace. "Damn," Terry whistled. "Is that a rolling pin like in the funny pages?" They kept walking. A quarter mile later, as promised, they came across it. An old sandwich board sign, plywood painted white. "Satanic Exorcism" in big bold letters. And then right underneath it, "All you can eat catfish, 50 cents. It was laying on the ground, run over a dozen times, covered in weeds and kudzu. A side road ran off to the left, and it was as overgrown as the sign, leading to God knows where. "Okay, I have an idea," Terry said. "Lay it on me. Hand me my shit. That's my idea." Graydon unzipped the backpack and pulled out a baggie that was almost empty. "This is the last of it, dude." "That's all right. This is the last day anyway." "You said that yesterday." "I try to say it every day. You know why, right, Graydon?" "Because today's the first, last, and only day, right, Terry?" Terry grabbed the baggie and took out the 3 remaining hits of LSD down from the bottom corner. "Gray, we're following your whatever it is, and I'm cool with it. I don't get it, but I'm with you, brother. But you know that this shit is crazy. We both know that. This here, going to some kind of massacre church crawling with snakes, used to be run by a murder preacher who's talking about us on the radio. We're going to do something this crazy. Let's just embrace the crazy. So I'm going to trip balls. Let's see what the dead have to say about it." When his blood crackled with acid, Terry Smith could see things that lived on the edges of perception. Side by side, Gray and Terry left the road and walked towards the old church. The first broadcasts had started just weeks after the massacre. The bodies had barely been collected and sorted and buried when Elmo Cubbins made his first broadcast from somewhere deep in the heart of the swamp. It came on random AM frequencies at random times of night. There were also ham radio operators from as far away as Anchorage who reported hearing his sermon. Cubbins' body had never been recovered, so he was always considered a suspect in the events of that day. He was never seen again, although he was often heard. Days, weeks, months would pass, and then another phantom broadcast, always live, always in the moment, with no rhyme or reason, just pure, venomous madness.
God is dead. All gods are dead. Our lives, what we consider to be our lives, are but specks and remnants in the dissolving dreams of desiccated deities. We exist in the magnificent miasma of their putrefaction, the rotting mess they left behind, too small, too insignificant to even realize the things that we believe are all-knowing, all-seeing, omnipotent, omnipresent. They're just a fetid carcass upon which we crawl. To a maggot, a corpse is the world, the universe, all of reality.
In the blistering bright sun, the ground was brittle and brown, but so far free of snakes. They walked past the church, over towards the swampland that pushed up against the edge of the property. There in the mud, they saw dozens of snakes lurking in the shadows of the tupelo trees, waiting for the coolness of the night to come. No one had tended the church grounds in decades, but it was still only grown back in patches, hugely tall in spots, but dead to the roots in others. They picked their way through the maze carefully, heading towards the church. "You feeling anything yet?" Graydon asked. "Nah. What's it been, like 5 minutes?" "More like 30. "Really?" Terry wiggled his fingers in front of his face. No, I think I'm good." The front doors were shut, but the locks had long since rusted away and fallen out. The boys each pushed one door open and let the noontime sun flood into the accursed sanctuary. "Holy shit," they said. Inside were hundreds upon hundreds of snakes. Skinless snakes, headless snakes, strung up from the ceiling by their tails, dangling like withered bits of string. On the altar up front, facing the pews, was an enormous pile of snake heads, on top of which sat an old radio, hissing static. In the front pew sat one person, an old woman with dirty gray hair. "Maybe I'm starting to feel it, Graydon," Terry whispered. "This is fucked up. Is this real?" The woman slowly stood up and turned to face them. In 1969, Miss Thelma had been covered in horrible grease burns, leaving her as a patchwork of white, brown, and pink splotches. One of her eyes was milky, and half of her face drooped with palsy. "You all know why you're here?" Miss Thelma asked them. They looked at each other and then shook their heads. "No, ma'am, we don't." "You here to listen to the broadcast. You need to hear it so you know we all just ain't snake-bit crazy country folk." Graydon started to respond, but the old lady was already limping away from them. "Come on then, get you something to eat." Graydon knew how to read the signs, how to follow them, when to talk and when to shut up. He knew the difference between seeing something and when he was being shown something. So he shut his mouth and he followed. "Do you hear that?" Terry murmured, and he looked back towards the door. "I'm gonna go check that out, man. Give me a plate, unless it's snake meat." Terry wandered back out into the sun, looking for the throbbing heartbeat that was filling his ears, and he left Graydon to follow the woman. For a moment, Graydon was alone in the sanctuary, surrounded by the dangling serpents. And then that old radio hissed, crackled, and came to life.
Profound power. Be it good or evil, if you still believe in things like good and evil, it always leaves a mark. The stronger the power, the deeper the mark. Inhuman events scar the world itself. They tear the veil of reality to shreds. When a mirror breaks, the cracks crawl out to the edges. They spread through the entire piece of glass like ripples on a pond. Dark echoes, vestigial limbs, but those limbs can still grab. They can still claw. They can still pull you under.
Miss Thelma was indeed serving snake meat. "Your friend want some?" she asked. "No, ma'am. He went outside to get some air." She shook her head, smelled the meat, and crinkled her nose. "No, he ain't. He's caught the sound of it, I bet you. Them twitchy types hear it more than regular folk like you or me." In the little alcove behind the sanctuary, she had set up a living area, a cot, a hot plate, a Bible under a hand-drawn picture of Jesus, and another of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She handed Graydon a plate. It didn't look like much, and it didn't smell like much. But he'd come this far, so he took a little nibble. Hot damn, it was delicious. She might be snake-bit crazy, but Miss Thelma could still cook a fucking plate. He devoured it, and while his mouth didn't ask for seconds, his eyes surely did. She smiled at that, a half-smile being the best she could manage, and piled more snake meat on his cracked plate. "You're a Jones, ain't you?" At night, ghosts have an ethereal shimmer to them. In the piercing glare of the sun, these ghosts looked like flickers of white television static. Outlines moving through the air, laying on the ground, twisting and turning and writhing as they relived their deaths being consumed by serpents. Terry walked through the mottled grass, and the ghosts showed him how the dead spots were the places people had died. When the blood and the unholy venom had mixed, the ground below turned barren. He walked past the ghosts, through them, towards the water's edge, where he saw other ghosts wading out into the swamp. Graydon finished his second helping of barbecue snake before answering. "Yes, ma'am, I am. Do you know my family?" "It was a lucky guess. We don't get too many black folks coming out to this place. We're too sensible. Mostly, it's like your friend out there. White folks either on drugs or writing some darn fool book or just plain crazy. But I met a couple young men over the years. Sometime back and then sometime before that. And I can see you have their eyes. So tell me, Mr. Jones, what brings you to my door? The road just brought us here. She cackled. Last one said the same thing. Won't never make no sense to me. Roads just lay there. They don't bring no one nowhere. It's something my family does, Miss Thelma. Always have. We get old enough and we have to go, even if we don't particularly want to go. When it's time, and we go. Go where? We don't have a name for it. Other people call it a spirit quest or a walkabout. Oh, you mean like when Indians eat that peyote and talk to birds? Sort of. I leave that part to Terry, actually. No, we Joneses, we just go. We see the world, we try to find out where to go next, and we write down what we find along the way. You find anything yet? She asked. And he nodded. The X scars on his belly itched whenever he thought about the harrowspecks. Jones' family is sort of tangled up in history, so we always find something, or something finds us. Found you. She shook her head, genuinely perplexed at this notion. You make less sense every minute, son. Maybe that preacher's in your head already.
Does our belief in him, and he who crawls beneath us, or in any of the dead gods, does it falter because he's dead? The stars we see twinkling in the night sky, they're all long dead, and each and every one, yet we stand in the midnight darkness surrounded by them, enchanted by their heavenly beauty, so how can they be dead? What does dead even mean? Those stars have the same power over us as they did our first stoop-backed ancestors living in caves. The same dead stars blaze for them as they do for us. And our God rots beneath us, bones leaching into soil, breeding toxicity, poisoning bloodlines, releasing his venom over millennia. His power still reverberates every one of my synapses like a tuning fork, showing me visions, the before, the now, and the after all collapse into a singularity. Yeah, I see the snake god. I see the exorcism. I see the two bound boys. I see the ripper and the seven. I see the rich and the poor and the sick and the strong and the ghastly and the ghoulish, the brave and the bold, all bound together on one true faith. The snake god does not eat his tail. The snake god eats the world.
Terry stood at the edge of the dark water. The swamp was unnaturally quiet. Even the heartbeat he had heard before was stilled. There was nothing. The little drifting specks and outlines of the snake-bit dead, those wayward ghosts, were also still. Standing, looking at Terry, and now waving him forward. All those snakes that had been clustered at the bank, damned if they didn't start swimming away. Not much, but enough to open a path. A clear way forward into the heart of the bayou. Was this the acid? It didn't feel like the acid. There was a texture to this. Made it feel like one of those omens and portents that Gray was always going on about. So Terry decided to take off his shoes and his socks. There was no use in getting them all wet. Graydon looked out a small, ill-fitted window and watched his friend as his friend watched the swamp. And the swamp watched them both. Your friend? You best go fetch him. If he goes in, he will not come back out. Why is that? He asked her, not taking his eyes off of Terry. How much you know about snakes, young'un? Not much. I know enough to not get too close to them. Well, there are some snakes that are too slow and can't strike far enough. They need to use a lure to bring the prey in nice and close and make for easy pickings. There's a snake that lays out with its tongue extended, just laying there. Tongue looks like the same kind of worms that the frogs eat. And it lays there long enough, and then the frogs come to eat the worm, and they get et. This works on some folks, too. You understand? Speaking in tongues, making people curious. What is that? Let's get a little closer. It works so good that when you tell them, do not go, this is a trap, they always say, it'll be okay. That's just an old story. But then they don't come back. Gobbled up. The damn preacher, the radio show, that ain't real. It's a lure. It's tongue. Is that why you're here? Graydon asked her. Try and stop people from going out there? Miss Thelma shrugged. Used to be. It never worked. Now, I'm just waiting, hoping that man shows his face just one more time, so that I can kill him before I pass on. At this point, Terry was taking off his shoes and socks and rolling up his pant legs. I better go see to him. Graydon moved to the door. Jones, I want you to do him and me and yourself a favor and keep on walking. You get your friend, and then you let that road bring you someplace else. You hear? Graydon went to her. He leaned in close and gave her a delicate kiss on the top of her head. Yes, ma'am, we will. I thank you for the food. Terry was just about to step into the water when Graydon grabbed him by the elbow. Hey, man, you don't want to go out there. I don't? It's a trap. You won't come back. But what about them? He pointed to the ghosts. They all want me to go. Graydon looked Terry in the eyes, his little pinprick pupils looking back from another plane. I don't. I want you here with me, brother. Okay? Terry's eyes softened, coming back to earth. Gray, it's you. You're the only family I have. Terry, I'm the only family you need. He put on his shoes and his socks, and they put Kipo Flats to their back and headed west. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. You can find the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, or if you really want to support A Scary Home Companion and help us grow, check out the Patreon. You get extras, episode scripts, analysis videos breaking down the episodes, and exclusive stories. Music for this episode was provided by Weldroid and Friends with At Night the Dreamers Travel. Digital Primitives with No Holiday, Fork in the Blender with Swamp Blues, and one of our show favorites, Loco with On the Riverside. The theme music was provided by Chelsea Oxendine. The episode was edited and produced by Jeff Davidson.